He was charming. He was intelligent. He was the kind of man who could light up a room with just a smile. To the outside world, he seemed like an ordinary guy. Someone you might see in a coffee shop, striking up a conversation, buying a drink for the person next to him. But behind that smile, something far darker lurked. And for years, no one suspected the monster he truly was. Dozens of young women were found murdered across the country in the 1970s. Brutally attacked, often in broad daylight, then left in remote areas, stripped of their dignity and their lives. It was a wave of terror that spread like wildfire, leaving communities paralyzed with fear. What connected these deaths? What kind of person could move so seamlessly through society, blending in, even gaining sympathy and trust, while being responsible for such unspeakable horrors? The police had no answers, the victims' families had no peace, and the public was left wondering, was the killer hiding in plain sight, just one step ahead of the law? But there was one thing that everyone had overlooked, a critical detail buried beneath the surface. A detail that, once discovered, would send shockwaves through the nation. Who was this monster? What drove him to kill? And how did he manage to evade capture for so long? The story you're about to hear is one of manipulation, terror, and a man who fooled everyone, even those closest to him. This is the story of Ted Bundy, the charm of evil. The 1970s were a time of great change in America, a decade marked by political upheaval, social movements, and growing fears of an unseen danger. But for many young women across the country, there was something even more terrifying creeping through the shadows. A predator, a killer, whose charm and intelligence concealed a monstrous truth. It began as a series of strange, unrelated disappearances. A young woman vanishes from a college campus. A girl goes missing while walking home from a friend's house. At first, the police had no reason to believe these cases were connected. After all, these were isolated incidents. But as the bodies began to pile up, the horrific reality began to set in. Someone, somewhere, was methodically hunting women. But who and why? To the authorities, these crimes seemed random, senseless. The killer seemed to appear out of nowhere, always one step ahead. His method was chillingly efficient. Approach his victims with kindness and charm, gain their trust, and then strike. Often, he would use the same routine, pretending to be injured, asking for help, offering a ride, or even pretending to be a police officer. Each time, the women were fooled, and each time, they vanished, leaving nothing but whispers and fear. The media was abuzz. The public was gripped by terror. But no one, not the police, not the reporters, not even the families, had any idea who the killer was. No one could see the dark force hiding behind the facade of normalcy. The investigation seemed to be going nowhere, and the victims' families were left with nothing but heartbreak and unanswered questions. It wasn't until the killer struck again, this time in a different state, that the authorities began to realize something terrifying. The pattern was unmistakable. The crimes weren't random. They were the work of a single man, a man who had been hiding in plain sight all along. Who was this killer? What was his story? And how did he manage to slip through the cracks of the law for so long? This is the chilling story of Ted Bundy, a man who used his charm to mask his evil and left a trail of broken lives in his wake. As the body count continued to rise, investigators were desperate for answers. The pattern was there, but the connection between the killings wasn't immediately clear. Women were disappearing from different states, Utah, Washington, Colorado, and the nature of the crimes seemed eerily similar. But there was no discernible link between the victims, no common thread other than their age, their appearance, and their vulnerability. The police were working in the dark, piecing together fragmented clues. The victims' descriptions were vague, and eyewitnesses often reported different details, which only led to confusion. At first, they considered the possibility of multiple killers. But as the bodies began to pile up, it became apparent that this was no random spree. It was methodical, calculated, a serial killer in the making. Then came a breakthrough, a composite sketch. One survivor had managed to escape the killer's grasp. She told authorities about a man with a dark, handsome face, athletic build, and a distinctive limp. The sketch, while rough, became a key piece of evidence. But it was still vague, and the killer could have been anyone. The police had no clear idea of who they were looking for. The breakthrough came when the investigation turned to a single vehicle. Witnesses had reported seeing a tan Volkswagen Beetle near the crime scenes. Police began to focus on vehicles matching that description, but even with this new lead, they were no closer to identifying their suspect. It was as if the killer had vanished from the radar. Then came a tip that would change everything. In 1975, police in Utah stopped a young man in a Volkswagen Beetle, his car matching the description. He was arrested for the kidnapping of a woman who had managed to escape. His name was Ted Bundy. At first glance, Bundy didn't seem to fit the profile of a serial killer. He was well-groomed, articulate, and appeared harmless, a far cry from the image of the cold-blooded murderer they had envisioned. But the authorities were beginning to connect the dots. His movements matched the crime scenes, and evidence was starting to mount against him. Bundy's charm, his calm demeanor, and his ability to disarm even the most skeptical investigators only added to the mystery. How could someone so seemingly normal, so likable, be capable of such unspeakable acts? The investigation was only beginning, and what they would soon uncover would stun the world. As Ted Bundy's arrest in Utah made headlines, the police were still piecing together the full extent of his crimes. On the surface, Bundy seemed an unlikely suspect. He wasn't the typical image of a murderer, a disheveled loner, or a violent outcast. Instead, he was articulate, intelligent, and charming. He had attended college, held various jobs, and even had a girlfriend. To many, he was just another friendly young man. But to the investigators, something didn't add up. Bundy's arrest came after he was connected to the abduction of a woman named Carol DeRanch. She had narrowly escaped from Bundy's clutches after he lured her into his car under the pretense of being a police officer. She was able to provide a detailed description of him, along with the Volkswagen Beetle, which ultimately led to his arrest. But it wasn't just the DeRanch case that raised suspicions. As investigators dug deeper into Bundy's background, they began to see disturbing patterns that connected him to a series of murders and disappearances. Bundy's car, a tan Volkswagen Beetle, was an exact match for the vehicle seen at multiple crime scenes. The authorities had been looking for a car with a similar description, and when Bundy's was identified, it became a key piece of the puzzle. But the real breakthrough came when detectives learned of Bundy's previous interactions with the police in Washington state. 1974, before his arrest in Utah, Bundy had been pulled over by officers who had noticed a suspicious man in a similar car near the crime scenes. At the time, they hadn't made the connection. But now, in hindsight, it was clear. Bundy had been under their noses all along. Detectives began to review all the available evidence, witness descriptions, forensic findings, and the patterns of the crimes. And it became clear that Bundy was involved in multiple killings. The strangulation, the brutal attacks, and the methodical way he selected his victims all fit a chilling pattern. And as Bundy's background came under scrutiny, more disturbing details surfaced. Bundy had been living a double life. He had convinced friends, family, and even law enforcement that he was harmless. He used his charm and good looks to manipulate people, and his ability to fit in. Appearances were everything. He had even been involved in local politics, showing up to rallies and events, building a positive public image. As investigators closed in, they discovered that Bundy had not only been a master of deception, but had been operating across state lines, leading a cross-country killing spree that was becoming harder and harder to ignore. But the most chilling discovery was yet to come. Ted Bundy wasn't just a killer. He was a predator who had carefully planned and executed every step of his crimes, blending into society, deceiving everyone around him. The shocking truth was beginning to unfold, and soon, the world would know the true face of evil. Ted Bundy was a master of deception. To many who knew him, he was an enigma. A charming, intelligent, and likable young man who could easily make friends and blend into social settings. He wasn't the stereotypical loner or angry outcast that many might expect a serial killer to be. In fact, Bundy's ability to maintain such an ordinary, appealing facade made him even more terrifying. He was the perfect wolf in sheep's clothing. Born in 1946 in Vermont, Bundy's early life was marked by confusion and a sense of abandonment. His mother, Louise Bundy, raised him as a single parent, and he grew up believing his mother's parents were his own. Bundy didn't learn the truth, that his mother was actually his biological mother. until later in life. This revelation had a profound impact on him, leaving him with a sense of deep emotional turmoil. As a child, he was often described as quiet, intelligent, and charming. He did well academically and was popular in school, but there were always signs that something was off. Some classmates later recalled feeling uncomfortable around him, sensing an underlying darkness, though they couldn't pinpoint it. After high school, Bundy went on to college at the University of Washington, where he majored in psychology. He was well liked by professors and peers, involved in student politics, and even dated a string of women, including a particularly significant relationship with a young woman named Elizabeth Kloepfer. Despite his outward normalcy, those closest to him began noticing strange behavior. He was secretive, sometimes aggressive, and even violent at times. But Bundy knew how to hide his darker urges behind a mask of charm and civility. At the same time, Bundy's outward appearance, a clean-cut, well-dressed, and articulate young man, masked his dark fantasies. It was clear that Bundy had a troubling relationship with women. Many of his early interactions with women were manipulative, including an obsession with control and power. His charm and intelligence allowed him to weave a web of lies that fooled even those who knew him best. To his girlfriend, Elizabeth, Bundy was loving, supportive, and kind. Yet, behind closed doors, he was a different man, often quick to anger and prone to controlling, obsessive behaviors. Bundy's outward persona was the key to his success as a killer. He didn't just look like an average college student. He could blend seamlessly into any situation. He used his charm to gain access to his victims, often pretending to be injured or in distress. One of his favorite tactics was to feign a disability, asking women for help, or pretending he couldn't carry something. He would approach them with a seemingly harmless request, then overpower them when their guard was down. But Bundy wasn't just a criminal who used charm to lure victims. He was a psychopath. Psychiatrists and criminal psychologists later explained that Bundy's inability to feel empathy, coupled with his narcissism and manipulation skills, made him an ideal predator. His outward persona was a mask, a well-crafted front designed to conceal his true nature. What made Bundy even more terrifying was his ability to manipulate the justice system. During his trial, he acted as his own lawyer, a move that allowed him to remain in the spotlight. He projected confidence, even when the evidence against him mounted. Bundy's arrogance was chilling. He believed that his intelligence and charm would help him outwit the system. He often played to the media, showing off his calculated charisma for the cameras. As investigators dug deeper into Bundy's life, they found that his killing spree wasn't just about violence. It was about power and control. Bundy's mask had slipped, and the world was starting to see the monster behind it. As the investigation against Ted Bundy progressed, it became clear that the evidence against him was overwhelming. Yet, even as the net closed in, Bundy remained calm, almost detached, as if he were playing a game. He was arrested and charged with several murders, but it wasn't until he was facing a potential death sentence that the full scale of his crimes began to surface. In a shocking turn, Bundy started to confess to a string of murders. He offered chilling details of the killings, recounting how he would lure women into his car, incapacitate them, and then brutally attack them. Some of the confessions were graphic, detailing the methods he used to stalk his victims and carry out his attacks. But even more disturbing was Bundy's demeanor during these confessions: cold, detached, and almost clinical. He showed no remorse, no empathy, and no genuine apology. He spoke about the murders with a disturbing calmness, as though he were discussing the plot of a novel, not the lives he had taken. Bundy's confessions were key to linking him to more than 30 murders, although it's likely the true number was much higher. He took investigators through some of the crime scenes, describing in vivid detail the locations where he had disposed of his victims. Bundy had become both a source of terror and fascination, a man who had slipped through the cracks of the justice system for years, only to finally reveal himself. But despite his confessions, Bundy's trial was far from straightforward. His charm and intelligence, once again, came to the forefront as he tried to defend himself in court. Representing himself at trial, Bundy used his wit to challenge the evidence and even cross-examine witnesses, all while maintaining his public image as the calm, collected law student. However, the overwhelming weight of the evidence ultimately sealed his fate. In 1979, Bundy was convicted of the murders of 2 women in Florida and sentenced to death. His trial became a media sensation, drawing national attention to the depths of his crimes and the twisted mind behind them. Ted Bundy's legacy is one of chilling manipulation, not just of his victims, but of everyone around him. He has become the archetype of the charming killer, a man who could deceive with ease, hiding his true nature behind a polished exterior. His case marked a turning point in criminal psychology, as experts began to recognize the unique combination of intelligence, charisma, and a complete lack of empathy in serial killers. Psychologically, Bundy was a textbook example of a psychopath. He exhibited a complete absence of remorse, guilt, or empathy for his victims. His ability to blend into society, build relationships, and manipulate those around him showed the depth of his narcissism and control over his image. Experts now understand that Bundy's ability to compartmentalize his life, his public persona, and his true nature was a key factor in his success as a predator. Bundy's case also highlighted the importance of criminal profiling and forensic psychology in solving serial murders. His ability to evade capture for so long demonstrated how difficult it was for investigators to recognize the signs of a serial killer in a person who appeared so ordinary. Ted Bundy's crimes and psychological profile continue to fascinate and horrify to this day, serving as a grim reminder of the danger of underestimating the mask of normalcy that evil can wear.